Alright everyone, I know I said I wasn't going to do another video on this until I was nearly finished, but it turns out this side needs a little bit more work than the other side, so I'm going to show you what I found. Right, I knew that it had a patch here and there in Japan, and that they weren't very good and I was going to have to redo them, but after I wire wheeled all the rest of it off on the inside, it turns out it needs rather extensive areas replacing. Everything that I've marked in white chalk and probably a few other bits besides. So my plan is I'm going to replace the full floor on this side. I've already drilled the spot welds on the seat rails and made a jig to align it back up. It turns out that rail is going to need to be replaced because that front edge is just peppered with holes. So my next step is to cut the floor out, but I decided that obviously I'll go right to the sill edge since I'm doing most of the floor. I'll have to put a join in on the tunnel. I haven't decided which way I'm going to do that yet, but for the sill edge, obviously I'll just spot weld it, remove the old and spot weld the new one back on. But that caused me a bit of a problem because the frame that I've got the car sat on is attached on the sill. So if I'm removing that panel, I was going to have to spot the car somehow. So what I came up with was this. I took the sill cover off the car, exposing all the metalwork on the side, and there were some bolt holes. So I made another adapter, drilled it onto there, drilled and mounted it onto there, and that is now holding the car up. I've also put a brace across because when I cut the floor out, the car might try to move, so I don't want it adjusting itself, so that should keep it locked across. It should be locked along the car by the box section of the sill, and the diagonals should take care of any other adjustment. So I think it should keep in alignment when I cut the floor out. So yeah, I'll just cut the floor out of a really old, really rare, really expensive, well, relatively expensive Japanese car, and there are no parts available. I'll just make one. Sure. Well, that's a big hole. I hope I know what I'm doing. It doesn't know it yet, but that sheet of metal is going to become the new one of those. So next up, I need to neaten up all these edges and remove the bit that are left behind. I'm going to grind through the spot welds on them. That's the best way to do it without damaging the piece underneath it. You can drill them, but it will leave a little bit of a mark usually, and there's always a danger that you go through. And since this is holding the car together at the moment, I don't want to risk drilling through any of the welds. So I'm just going to grind and chisel and remove the remaining piece of the floor from there and the back edge and from the seat rails, and then just clean up the surface ready for welding. Right, that's all the edges cleaned up, as much as I want to go. I haven't trimmed that edge flush yet, smooth rather, because I'm going to leave as much on as possible for now, and then I'm going to trim them both to suit when I've made the replacement panel. My next job is to mark out that panel on there as best I can. Some of it doesn't need to be exact, like the position of some of these holes, as long as they're roughly in a straight line, that would be fine, but other bits do need to be exact, where this goes over the seat rail and stuff. It turns out I'm going to have to replace that seat rail as well. As a hole in the back of it. Looks a bit too much to repair. Right, that's the basic shape marked out. I've gone around and measured, and I can't do that curve with the bead roller. I could maybe cut some off here, but it's getting a bit risky, it's a bit too close. So what I think I'm going to do for that is to just get a socket and like a socket the right size to fit in there, and a piece of steel. I'm going to bend that into a U shape to fit around the outside, and then just bash it till it looks right. It's a bit tight for the bead roller anyway, that, so that should work. I don't want to cut anything off it yet if I can help it, because it'll help keep its shape as I'm putting the shape in with the bead roller. It'll keep it flat, and yeah, I might need the metal yet. I don't know exactly where the edges are going to be, so cutting is a last resort, but I might need to, just to make my life a bit easier when I come to shrink and stretch it. But by then I'll have a better idea of the final dimensions. This is all a bit new to me. I've only just bought the shrinker and stretcher and the bead roller, so I'm going to need a bit of luck here, I think. Right, this is attempt number 2. First one was a disaster. But I fully expected that. That's why I bought 2 sheets of metal to start with. I knew I was going to mess the first one up. Turns out the shrinker and stretcher isn't much use for this. What I really needed to do was pre-stretch it in an English wheel. I did order one, it didn't turn up. I haven't got the money back yet. I could order another one, but instead I made some English wheel dies for my bead roller. Since I'm not trying to make any big curves and trying to get something flat, it's ideal. And it works a treat. So I'm going to pre-stretch this new pattern and then run it through the bead roller, and hopefully that'll get me the result I want. While I was on making stuff, I also made a table for the bead roller, because I found with the size of the sheet that I was using, I was trying to hang off it to keep the force on, to stop it bending around the wheels as I was going. So that's a massive improvement, and it works for the wheeling as well, since I'm trying to keep it flat. It takes a lot of the effort out and makes it a 1-person job instead of a 2-person job, really. And this was easy enough to make. These are the dies I made for wheeling. I just turned them up in the lathe out of the bar stock I had left from the dies I made for the 10mm step that I need in the panel. They're pretty simple, really. Just bought some 22mm bore bearings of, counterbored the rollers for them, and put a bit of a curve on the bottom roller. Works a treat. Well, that's some pre-stretching done. The panel's a big warped mess at the moment, but that's the idea. I want it to be like that, so that when I put the step in it, it pulls it back straight again. I don't know if I've stretched it enough though. I can always flatten it back out and try it again, but I think I'd rather go more than less, because I can always easily stretch the rest with this, but I can't stretch the step once it's in. Hopefully this one will turn out better than the first one. I think it will. Looks a mess at the moment, but hopefully that'll sort itself out. I've got the shape marked out again. That wasn't too easy. Now it's not a flat surface anymore. I've put a bit more of a radius on these dies. Originally I just had a 45 chamfer, but I found it was marking the panel and did actually cut one on one of the Tesco's. So I've got a nice radius and polished edge on it now, so it shouldn't damage it in case I need to flatten it out again and go back. Hopefully I don't. But I'm going to try the first stage of putting the step in this now. needs some hand finishing work. I was expecting that, but I'm pretty happy with the results so far. It's pulled it a lot flatter, and there's still more to go. So I think I'm going to do the second stage now, rather than backtrack. I think it's stretched enough. Right, I think I've got this to the stage where I can move on to the next phase. It's flat enough for me. A little bit of oil canning left in it, nothing major. I'm pretty happy with the way this turned out, to be honest, since I made both the tools effectively to do it, the two dies. It's pretty decent. I now need to put the embossing in around here and there and there and there, and I need to make a tool to do the dimples around those holes. I'll have to cut the holes out first though. It'll make it a bit easier because there'll be less metal to stretch. There's a little bit of a bubble left in the middle there, but once I put this embossing in and welded the seat rails on and stuff when it's in the car, I think that'll disappear. There's a little bit too much metal on here. It's not worth trying to shrink it though, because I'm putting a 90-degree fold in right there, so that'll just disappear. But yeah, I'm happy with that. It's quite nice. There's a little bit of heat shrinking. Probably shouldn't have done. I think I made it worse, but it's pretty good. I like it. Much better than the first go, that's for sure. I'm sure if I was to do a third one, that would be much closer to perfect. I've learned a lot on in the process, but this is good enough that I can work with it now. So I'm going to go with that and move on to the next step, because it's probably going to end up even more warped when I start putting these shapes in, so I'll soon find out. Well, with a little bit of pre-stretching and some bead rolling and a little bit of hammer work, got these bits looking half decent. Not finished yet though. Now I'm going to do the circle embosses. To get these dimples in, because it's not like a normal dimple die, I decided to make a tool. Bought some discs of steel off eBay, really cheap. I've then cut a groove in them at the right size, and for the one for the in, one for the out, and centre drilled it for a 10mm hole so I can pull it together with a big bolt. And then I've trimmed a piece of steel, 2mm steel, and then curved it, trimmed the ends so that it curved all the way, and then I'm going to weld it in, much like I have done with this one already. Still a bit warm. That's the inside. It's going to be the outside, slightly bigger. The bolt will centralise them, and then I'll just pull them together with the bolt, and it should look pretty good, I think. I've skimmed that off in the lathe after welding it on, so it's the right width, nice and round, the right height, and should be strong enough, since it only has to go a few mil. That's more than what I need, really. I could have just turned them out of a big chunk of steel, but it would have cost a lot to buy and took hours, and this is a lot easier, and I hope it works. Well, that's the tool made, inside and outside. Fit together like so, and a bolt to pull them together. Holes cut in the panel, so let's get cracking with that. Perfect. 3 more to go. Right, that's the next stage done. I had to use a little bit of hammer and dolly work around here where one meets the other, but it turns out really nice. Right, not bad. I can work with that. Well, that's the final shaping done to the panel. I'm really happy with the way it's turned out. The English wheel finally turned up, which allowed me to do this curve here. It's not just a straight line, that it actually does have a couple of dog legs in it where it meets the tunnel. It's not perfect, it could have been maybe slightly better, but I'm pretty happy with it. I did consider not buying all of these tools, not learning all of these skills, and just getting some big thick plates of steel plasma cut to the right shape of this, and then just pulling it together with a load of bolts. There's enough holes in it that I probably could have got enough bolts through, and that probably would have been easier, quicker and cheaper and a better result. But I like learning things and I like buying tools, so it's not the end of the world. It's been a pretty time consuming and expensive endeavour making this panel. So it's probably set me back about a month deciding to replace this floor as a whole piece rather than just put a few patches in it. But to be honest, that wouldn't have worked. It would have just been a right mess, and I'd have been blowing holes everywhere, and it wouldn't have been a good result, and it would have just rusted again in no time, to be honest. So this is the right thing to do. So it hasn't really set me back a month. It's just, it's taken a month to get to this point, and it really feels like a long time on one panel. It's the longest I've ever spent on a single panel, but it's probably the biggest panel I've ever done at the same time, so there is that. But hopefully I can get this welded in soon, get the rest of it done, and then move on to the next job. So I made quite a few tools to finish this panel off. I've made the English wheel rollers for the bead roller. I made the step dies for the bead roller to get the 10mm step in. I maybe could have found some of these to buy, but it was easier just to make them. I made a slapping spoon for getting it nice and flat. That was easy enough. I could have bought that as well, but I needed one and I could make one in about 20 minutes, so that was fine. I made that for getting the semicircle on the end of there. I made the dimple dies for getting the circular recesses in. I also made the table for the bead roller so that I could actually support the panel and get the shape in it that I needed. Yeah, I've made quite a few tools to do this job. That's the floor loosely held in position with a couple of clamps. I've done a little bit of trimming on the sides just so I can get it in place. That's certainly not the final dimensions. And I'm just lining it up now with the seat rails so that I can get a nice scribed edge on there, because I need to put a flange on that edge, because it's not just a straight cut, so I need to cut that a little bit further than that line and then fold it over, and then I can start working on the other flanges. I need to straighten up this edge and clean it up ready for welding as well, and decide where I'm going to cut it as well, because that might not be the place. I might cut some more off the car yet so that I can put the weld more along here, but the higher up it is, the harder it's going to be to weld and grind and such. And I think it's probably best to keep it below the seat rail so that the seat rail is straddling the join. I need to replace the seat rails anyway, but it would be best that way. As you can see, the fit's pretty good so far, and it looks right. There's a few more final touches I need to do to it once it's welded in. I need to put the studs back in here. There's 4 or 5, maybe 6 studs run down there for the pipes and stuff that sit in the tunnel. But since those holes need to be exactly right to line up with the existing bracketry, I'm going to leave that till last. I can soon just drill those holes and weld, or even just put a nut and bolt in it. No one would know the difference once it's tight. But I think I'll probably try and weld it on somehow. I just can't find a suitable stud to buy, so I might have to end up making them, which is more work than I wanted really, but we'll see. So I'm finally ready to weld this beast of a panel on. The fit is pretty good. I've decided to go with TIG welding for the seam. It was always going to happen really. If I give it a little push, the gap's pretty good, and then I can just adjust it as I go. I've tacked on these little strips of metal just to help it stay aligned, because otherwise it goes one side or the other. And the sill edge is clamped. I haven't drilled the sill edge because I've now bought a spot welder to do that, because I wasn't happy with the idea of not welding to all 3 layers of the sill. This way I can weld through all of them without having to drill a hole all the way through and weld that up, or God knows what really. And I certainly didn't fancy being underneath there in that little gap, welding right near my neck with the possibility of dripping hot metal on me, because that often happens when you're doing plug welds, and when I'm doing them anyway. So I'm finally ready to weld it in. It's been a long process. Yeah, that's my radio. Well, that's that edge tacked on, and the gap is way better than I ever thought I was going to be able to get it. It's pretty consistent all the way down. How I did it was I trimmed the panel to about where I wanted it to end, then hand filed it flat using the file lengthways, and then scored a line on the car, tin snipped that just slightly away from it, and then hand filed the car flat again. And rather than trying to make sure each panel meets each other perfectly, I tried to make sure each panel was as flat as possible, because over a length like that and the shape that it is, there is a little bit of wiggle room, so it didn't have to be perfectly flat because it's on a join and a curve. So I was able to get the join pretty good all the way along, pretty much just by hand filing it. So now I've got to do the full weld, which is going to be part from the outside, part from the inside, because halfway down I have to swap over because of this bar here. Well, that's the TIG butt weld done. Easily the trickiest weld I've ever done. Easily the biggest single weld I've ever done as well, I believe. Certainly the biggest single TIG weld. It's a little rough where there's hammer marks, because I couldn't quite get around with the hammer and dolly easily, even with the modified dolly that I made. It's still really tricky. Now the next step is to do the sill edge and the back edge down there. Insert Scarface quote here. Right, let's try this out. So that's the end of the trickiest panel I've ever made. I've done whole builds in less time than it's taken me to build this single panel. That's the outside. That's the weld down there. Oops. Spot welds down the sill and the back edge and the inside. Gives you a full view of it. Looks pretty stock. Weld's not as neat as I would have liked, but it's perfectly structural. That's the main thing. So all that's left now is to remanufacture the seat rails and the brace that goes underneath down this channel here, like that one. That should be fairly easy. I'm going to find some square nuts to replace the ones that are on it, or were on it. So yeah, I'm pretty happy with that. It's been an absolute nightmare. I've lost sleep over it. I think I've lost hair over it. But it's finally done, and I can move on to the rest. And hopefully I should be able to bash the rest out in a fairly short time, because it's all pretty straightforward. Apart from that little bit up there around the aircon pipes there, I may have to remove the dash and the aircon unit to do that, but I might be alright. We'll see. So the next time you see this car, hopefully I'll be painting it and putting it back together, and maybe even getting an MOT test on it. Make sure it's roadworthy, which I'm sure it will be after all this. But yeah, that's how you make a full floor pan. That's how I made one anyway. So I guess that's all I've got for you today. Thanks for watching. Subscribe if you want to see more. See ya.